So today is April 8th, 2023. April 8th, of course, on the Mahayana calendar, the Japanese Mahayana calendar, and probably the Chinese as well, is considered the date of the Buddha's actual birth, 2,500 years ago. So I'm going to read this morning from my own book, A Zen Life of Buddha, because I want to recall that the Buddha is really the foundation of our practice, not an add-on to Zen. And Vesak, which is typically a festival of spring, when the Buddha's birth is celebrated, often becomes a kind of children's festival. Maybe adults don't take it quite as seriously. I want to take a look at it from the ground of practice and see why we're doing this and what we're really celebrating and what we're really upholding. And then, of course, we'll follow this with our ceremony in honor of the Buddha's birth here at the Zendo. So I'm now finishing a companion book to A Zen Life of Buddha, which will be A Zen Life of Bodhisattvas, which has been really interesting to work on and helpful to me. It will approach through folklore, koans, and classical Buddhist teaching, how in Zen and Zen practice we work with and look at the idea, central idea of Mahayana practice, which is that of the Bodhisattva, the wisdom being. To start, Roshi Philip Kapleau, author of the classic Three Pillars of Zen, whose disciples Rose and I are, used to say Zen is rather simple. To practice it, you need only one article of belief, that the Buddha was not a fool or a liar. When upon his great enlightenment, he spontaneously exclaimed, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue. That means each one of us. Sometimes that can be very hard to believe, hard to take in. When we see what we do, when we see how our minds work, when we see what we feel and how we react, what does it mean that each of us has the same nature as the fully realized Buddha, a nature of wisdom, virtue, compassion? That's quite a stunning statement when you think about it, when you don't gloss over it. When you know yourself minute by minute, how you actually live, what you actually think. It's rather remarkable. I would make it revolutionary, really. And of course, this is not to lower the bar. This is not about going, well, the Buddha was just as goofy as I am. No, that would not be the point either. So what is the point? It's a real, this is our central koan. Anyway, the essence of Zen Buddhism begins here with the ex-Prince Siddhartha Gautama's historic realization or enlightenment. Enlightenment, of course, suggests, and this is the whole problem of practice in a nutshell. Enlightenment suggests it's something that you can get. And once you have it, man, you're enlightened. But that's not quite how it goes. Maybe you've noticed that at this point in your life and practice. You will never get enlightened. Let me make that absolutely clear to you. You will not be enlightened. I'm sorry. I have to tell you that. What will happen is that you will disappear into standing, sitting, walking, getting tired and sleeping, getting hungry and eating, seeing the sunrise and the leaves become bright, seeing the sun set and the stars appear. Intimacy. You can't get intimacy. It's already your nature. You just don't know it. But people get so tangled up. We're going to get enlightened, and then you have some kind of falling away of self-centeredness, and you think you are enlightened. I've got it. And then the problems are compounded again and again and again. What does the Buddha's birth mean to all of this? To our birth as Buddha? That's always the point, isn't it? Our own birth as Buddha. What does that mean? All your problems magically disappear? You're suddenly transformed into a radiant being and people sprinkle flowers and incense on your path as you walk down the street? We really do have to get clear on this. We carry so many preconceptions, so many hopes that are unrealistic. In any case, to go on, we don't gain anything. We don't get enlightened. Rather, through attention to counting the breath, experiencing the breath, putting our attention into our koan, we become of less interest to ourselves. And in this losing is finding the world, all beings. Step in, trees, mountains, bugs, rivers, people, and we rediscover our original unblemished intimacy with all things. No longer strangers to this earth, to others, or to ourselves. Such intimacy has healing power. Around 2,500 years ago, the Buddha revealed a path of fulfillment that unfolds where and as we are, with our problems, with our issues, with our shortcomings, with our failures. That's one of the things that I love about the Jataka tales. It's not always hagiography. The Buddha was fantastic. The Buddha was surrounded by light. Everyone loved him. The Jatakas show him making mistakes, failing, getting back up and trying again, correcting his own errors. This is truly encouraging for this major religious figure to be shown in less than perfect light, but the perfection is this effort, his ongoing, his commitment, again and again and again. That's one reason I love the Jataka tales. They show that, the process. In any case, this is the essence of the Buddha way, a Zen life of Buddha. To begin to walk this path, nothing more is needed than sincerity and a fundamental desire to see more clearly into who we ourselves actually are, or we might say what we ourselves actually are. One of the really important central koans is to take a step from the top of a 100-foot pole. When you do, you may find, in fact you will find, that the world of the 10 directions is your entire body. What am I? What are we talking about? The birth of the Buddha is really about looking into the central issue. So, with this little book, I've aimed at clarifying the central role of the Buddha's life in Zen practice. It is this foundation that makes Zen a spiritual path. The Buddha's life is where mythos, ethics, and practice unite. Of course, Zen practice and tradition itself adds quite the complexity to this simple little point. Yamada Koen Roshi, who was Eiken Roshi's teacher of the Sambo Zen, and he was the heir to Yasutani Roshi, whose teacher Harada Sogaku Roshi established the Harada Yasutani line, koan line, which is central to contemporary Western practice, even though it was a minor lay, essentially, practice, community of practice in Japan. It has become the foundational koan practice in the West. And it's a combination of Soto and Rinzai, which is what makes it dynamic and interesting. In any case, Yamada Roshi wrote in an unpublished commentary on the Blue Cliff record about the Buddha and Zen. He wrote, "The standard for all Zen persons, when we get right down to it, is Shakyamuni Buddha himself. Comparing the many masters of the path with Shakyamuni is enough to see just what level these people had arrived at in their understanding. The sutras and Zen records contain no mention of the Buddha Shakyamuni ever striking with a stick or shouting, 'Cuts!' Shakyamuni is forever the very model of gentleness when he appears in the koans. Consider, for example, case number 1 of the Book of Serenity, or the Book of Equanimity, the Denko Roko, which we take up towards the very end of our koan curriculum. It's a very Soto text. So he continues, he says, the world-honored one ascends the rostrum. One day the world-honored one ascended the rostrum. Manjushri struck the gavel and said, see clearly the Dharma King's Dharma. The Dharma King's Dharma is like this. The world-honored one then descended from the rostrum. Or case 65, or that is from case 65 of the Hekiganroku Blue Cliff record. A non-Buddhist questions the Buddha. Let me take that back. Hold on. No, this is the next one in case 65. He reveals the Dharma in his sitting still. Shouts of cuts and blows from the stick are all too green. So this is Yamada Roshi speaking about Zen tradition itself, that all these great teachers compared to the Buddha were green. They have yet to attain the behavior of the truly outstanding person. Lama Govinda, who is, of course, not a Zen teacher or practitioner, but a very noted, early, totally committed Westerner to Buddhist practice, and wrote a fantastic book called Foundations of Tibetan Mysticism. Traveled extensively in Tibet, he and his wife, Lee Gotami, who was an artist photographer, and he himself was an artist, produced many very important works on Tibetan Buddhism. He writes, this is only when Buddhists again began to turn more consciously towards the figure of the Buddha, whose life and deeds were the most vital expressions of his teachings, that Buddhism emerged from a number of quarreling sects as a world religion. In the crossfire of conflicting views and opinions, what greater certainty could there be than to follow the example of the Buddha? His words, according to changing times, may be interpreted in various ways. His living example, however, speaks an eternal language which will be understood at all times, as long as there are human beings. The exalted figure of the Buddha and the profound symbolism of his real as well as his legendary life, in which his inner development is portrayed and from which grew the immortal works of Buddhist art and literature, all of this is of infinitely greater importance to humanity than all the philosophical systems and all the abstract classifications of the Abhidharma. Can there be a more profound demonstration of selflessness, of the non-ego doctrine, of the Eightfold Path, of the Four Noble Truths, of the law of dependent origination, enlightenment, and liberation than that of the Buddha's way, which comprised all the heights and depths of the universe? Whatever is the highest perfection of the human mind, may I realize it for the benefit of all that lives. This is the gist of the Bodhisattva vow. So he strikes the same lofty tone as Yamada Roshi. And yet, of course, we know noted Zen Buddhist teachers of old have taken very different stances on this. Wu Men often downgrades the Buddha, ironically, calling him the golden-faced old man with the loud voice and other such things. Rinzai, who lived several hundred years before Wu Men, is widely remembered for a noted saying, of course, only one of many by him, but Westerners have latched on to this. If you meet the Buddha, kill him. What's he talking about? Another old noted teacher took a wooden Buddha down from its altar and burned it on a winter's night to keep himself warm, to keep himself from freezing. Did they mean for Zen students to ignore, belittle, or toss out the Buddha? Is this the real Zen view? What is the role of the Buddha in Zen practice? What is the Zen view of Buddha? Is there even such a thing? So this is the point of the book and the point of our half-day Zazenkai this morning, is to look at the Buddha's birth as not a child's event, not just a sweet event designed to kind of connect children of Buddhist parents with the Buddhist world view, a world of kindness, compassion, and such, but how it connects with ongoing practice right now, our life and our difficulties and our failures right now, which is always the point. So let's look at the Buddha's birth. We've come to that. First, a retelling of the essence of the legend, in case you don't remember it. And this often works well as a children's book. In fact, I've done one of it. You can get it from Amazon. Richard Wehrman, an old friend, designed it, and his wife Vicky, who's an artist, illustrated in full color. And they did a terrific job with it. It's a very sweet story, but again, that's not the end of it. It works that way. It's important that way as a children's story. As many children's stories are, they have much greater depths going on. So here's the legend, very nice. In the city of Kapilavastu in southern Nepal, Queen Maya, wife of Queen Suddhodana, the story is she had a marvelous dream, and in her dream, a six-tusked, one for each of the six realms, white elephant touched her right side with a lotus flower. And she awoke feeling quite joyous, really overwhelmed with joy. And she tells her dream, and the king's advisors say that the dream means that a child would soon be born to them. And if the child could be kept from all the painful facts of impermanence, he would become a world ruler, an emperor of the world. So great is the merit that this child is coming into life with. However, if he does encounter impermanence, and if it does strike him as being so painful that it makes no sense, he will abandon his home, he will abandon his wealth, he will head off alone into the forests and mountains, as sheltered as he's been as a child, and he will commit himself fully, no backing down, to the realization, if there is such a thing, of something beyond the disappointments, terrors, anxieties, seeming injustice of the impermanence of aging, sickness, and death that we all face as conscious beings, and we all struggle with in one way or another. It leads some people to acts of grievous evil in order to deal with their terror of impermanence. We see all kinds of problems in our world because of an inability to recognize, find a life beyond suffering, the suffering that comes from facing impermanence and feeling yourself being eaten up a little bit more every day. This is our constant terror. If you can't deal with it, you may find all ways of evading it. You might find ways of putting the hurt on others so you don't feel like you're hurting at the moment. We see human immaturity every day being acted out. The Buddha chose to mature, which is what we've chosen, to face these same facts and to grow up. This is what it means to be a bodhisattva, a wisdom being. It means a growing up being, a maturing being. Maturing, what does that mean? It means growing beyond our own habitual, unconscious self-centeredness. This is what it comes down to. This is the secret of the Buddha's birth. In any case, he saw that there were problems eventually, when he was still quite a young man, and the legend, I'll go a little bit more into it, the miraculous elements. The king tried to keep his son from all signs of impermanence. Good luck. If you think about it, You may see that's already a losing deal. At some point, a kid is going to see a squashed worm or a dead bug, or a pet will age. The Buddha's mother died a week after his birth. He was raised by his paternal aunt. It's not going to work out. But the king tried, and so the boy grows up in a very sheltered realm. And of course, at his birth, we're told that blossoms rained down from the ancient sala tree, that devas, beings of higher realms, sang in beautiful voices. He took 7 steps, and with each step, a lotus flower sprang up under his feet. And the devas poured heavenly ambrosia over him, washing all birth impurities away. Raising one hand towards the heavens and pointing the other down to the earth, he proclaimed the Buddha's lion's roar. Above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one. Alone, what does that mean? Alone but not lonely. What was he proclaiming? What does the birth of the Buddha proclaim? What is the meaning of this statement? Again, the legend is couched in miracles. Maybe it's something much more central to each one of us than the birth of a miraculous child. Then again, every child is a miracle, if we think about it. How does a child get born anyway? In any case, the legend also says that at that moment, all suffering beings everywhere experienced a moment of joy, peace, release. Prisoners, captives, exiles all found a moment of peace. Hellfires ceased to burn. Hungry ghosts were satisfied. Animals freed of fear. Warring spirits stopped battling one another. Happiness suffused all beings. And it said no one was happier than, of course, the Queen Maya. You'd seen her long-awaited child born at last, unless it was the Buddha himself, who already, as an infant, looked upon each deva, each animal, each tree, each flower, each stone, with the eye of a mother who regards her beloved only child. Total compassion, total love. So that's the essence of the Buddhist tradition's legend of the Buddha's birth. It uses the language of myth to point beyond the literal. Of course, as I've mentioned, the birth of any child, which is totally ordinary, is also at the same time a miracle. How do 2 cells become a living person? How do gastrula and blastula become a being with talents, interests, features, personality? Where does a child come from? We think it's like, Mommy, where did I come from? And then you get the whole, if you're unlucky, lesson in mechanics. Daddy and I, and here you go. But where does a child really come from? This is a very ordinary and very strange miracle. In any case, the birth of any one child is a mystery that affects us all, whether we consciously know it or not. So myth here gives imaginative space to the uncanny, ordinary reality we are actually living. Of course, babies don't talk. The baby Buddha's profound utterance cannot be taken and should not be taken literally. Fundamentalism's reductive literalization of myth takes us down a rigid road. And so far, knock on wood, no Buddhist sects have sprung up arguing over what the baby Buddha said or how many steps he took. Let's hope they never do. Yet, we humans have been sadly all too willing to cling to beloved untruths and make mountains out of not even molehills, but anthills. Zen begins with the sense that our current story, the one we live, might at least be, if not untrue, then inadequate to our actual reality. So, again, Roshi Kaplow's point, Zen begins with accepting that the Buddha was not a fool or a liar. When upon his great enlightenment, he proclaimed, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue. Only their self-oriented, delusive thinking prevents them from realizing and attesting to it. So we don't need to literally believe that the Buddha spoke as a newborn, or that flowers rained down from the skies, or that he took 7 steps. However, is there truth in these mythic elements nonetheless? Definitely. And while Zen practice offers us the opportunity to mature beyond beliefs and realize original nature or unconditioned mind for ourselves, the way of the Bodhisattva or wisdom being or growing up being must still begin with belief, with some basic faith that there is something beyond, yet not separate from the senses and intellect, that can be realized. And with that belief as well, or with the belief as well, that with work, with effort, with exertion, with commitment, with dedication, we can wake to it. However, while this sounds relatively simple, hey, we're all Buddhas, all we have to do is realize it. Typically, it does not come easily. Fairy tales worldwide remind us that we may have to eat 7 iron loaves and wear out 7 pairs of iron shoes before we arrive at fulfillment. And this is not simply advice for children, obviously. Persistence is the essence of the hero and heroine's journey. Persistence in Zen practice embodies our faith that the Buddha was not a fool or a liar when he spoke of our birthright, yours and mine, as imperfect as we each are. Each of us, all beings, even people we might find very hard to get along with, are Buddhas, fully endowed with wisdom and virtue, if, and it's a big if they only knew it. And there's the rub. In any case, the Buddha, or Roshi Kapleau in this case, or the Buddha actually, when he said that, all beings, he wasn't talking about something that's unique to Buddhists. Rather, he was telling us that there is something worth realizing at the core of this very life. And while we may have each caught glimpses of it now and then in childhood or as adults on our own, formal practice can make its more complete realization possible. Of course, the legendary words of the baby Buddha, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one, can be badly misunderstood as presenting egotism or narcissism. But actually, it's the opposite. They present absolute humility, absolute selflessness. A note to the classic text, Blue Cliff Record, by the Clearys, says, an ancient said, and I'm quoting an ancient teacher, a sage has no self, but there is nothing that is not his or her self. A sage has no self, but there is nothing that is not his or her self. Above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one. What is the sound of a single hand? Not 2 hands, a single hand. In any case, through the baby Buddha's legendary words, original enlightenment is given voice. And while legend asserts that the Buddha knew this truth at birth, history reminds us that that baby still had to grow up and become Prince Siddhartha Gautama, who, heartsick over his own personal first-hand experience of old age, sickness, and death, had to struggle to realize finally, fully, and consciously what he already had understood at birth. We're the same. We knew everything at birth. In the womb, we knew everything. So many traditions say. And then we forget at birth as we enter this world and have to really learn something we knew intrinsically from the very start. A Jewish legend says that every child in the womb, says this literally, already knows all truth, all wisdom. But at birth, an angel touches the child's upper lip, and there's that little indentation under your nose as proof. Of course, one of the oldest storytelling narrative devices in the world is that seeing is believing. So there's that little indentation under your nose. That's the mark of the angel's finger. And once the angel touched that spot on above your lip, we forgot it all. We forgot all the wisdom that we knew. And our life's work then is the work of overcoming that angelic touch and remembering what we once already fully knew. It is the work of making innate wisdom conscious and mature. And that's our challenge. Zen Master Ikkyu wrote, "When I tried to remember, I always forgot. Once I forgot, I never forget. When I tried to remember, I always forgot. Once I forgot, I never forget." When I tried to remember my wonderful enlightenment experience, when I tried to remember that wonderful sensation of unity, oneness, no selfness, the sunset stepped in, the child stepped in and was me, I always forgot it. I kept doing stupid things. I kept acting as if I was isolated and alone. I kept hurting myself and others. But once I forgot myself completely, there was nothing to remember and nothing to forget. Once I forgot my self-centeredness, once I forgot myself, as Dogen says over and over, to practice the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. Once I forgot myself, I no longer forget. It's always right there, every minute. There it is, fresh and new, every minute. Once the self is forgotten. How to do that is the challenge. You can't push the self away. You can't ignore the self. That leads to all kinds of dualistic tangles and repressions and suppressions, which tend to burst out in even greater and worse violence than before. This is the challenge of ongoing practice, to forget the self, not to get rid of the self, not to ignore the self, but to find something much more interesting than the self. And so we lose interest in it. And we find a cup of tea steps in. The person we're talking with steps in. It's a different way of living is the point, not a philosophical cachet, something we can carry around in our pocket to remind ourselves. Anyway, with the self-preoccupied, self-forgotten, what we've been seeking is already here. We don't have to add a thing. With self-centeredness dropped away, we are home. This is a great relief. And of course, we all know this. Literature draws on it again and again, that great ending of The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien had different endings, and he spoke with his inklings, C.S. Lewis and his other friends, as they smoked their pipes and drank their beer in the local pub at Oxford. And they said, no, get rid of all that stuff. End it right there. That's the good ending. And what is that ending? Sam returns from seeing Frodo and Gandalf off at the Grey Havens. And this is the last couple of sentences of The Lord of the Rings, before you hit the lengthy appendix with all the histories of the Third World. And he went on, and there was a yellow light and a fire within. And the evening meal was ready, and he was expected. And Rose drew him in and set him in his chair and put little Eleanor upon his lap. He drew a breath. "Well, I'm back," he said. That's it. I'm back. The point of the journey is not to end up in some esoteric place, but to come fully home. How do we do it? Zen practice says by attending to counting this breath from 1 to 10. by becoming fully aware of the breath all the way out, by sitting completely absorbed in the koan, in the question, or in thinking, not thinking. In short, by practicing is how the self is forgotten. We don't try and get rid of the self, we practice attending to the practice, and in the process, the self is forgotten. And as we do, the world of the 10,000 unique and individual things steps in and is as if we were born anew. This is how the Buddha gets born. This is the birth of the Buddha. This is what all the legendary material is pointing to. It's not an event 2,500 years ago. It's you right now, me right now, forgetting the self. We take 7 steps and lotus flowers spring up and blossoms rain from the sky, even if we're walking on cracked pavement and broken glass. There's a shift with the self forgotten. This is above the heavens, below the heavens. I alone, the honored one, as are all things. I alone doesn't mean just me. That would be the self-remembered. This is self-forgotten. This is the birth of the Buddha. This is why we pour tea over the baby Buddha. This is why we have our ceremony this morning. So, the Buddha's historic legendary birth, of course, in itself is a mystery. And presenting it as miraculous offers its own legitimate truth. This is the truth of myth and legend. Where does a person who is the first to do what's never before been done come from? Someone whose efforts ultimately influence millions of lives for the good. Where does such a person come from? It is kind of mysterious, isn't it? When you think of the effect of one life to change lives for the good, how do you explain? I mean, there are people whose life can affect many millions for the bad. We know that. History is full of such people. But how do we explain a person who does something that's never been done that affects millions of lives for the good? How do we explain it? Myth and legend is the only way we can, and there's truth in it. I'm not saying, oh no, it's really about you're forgetting the self and you waking up. That would already be to limit it. It's more than that. So Buddhist tradition says that the birth of the child Siddhartha Gautama was the first time in our world cycle that original realization found its voice. Of course, Buddhist tradition says there were many past Buddhas on earth before him, and there will be future Buddhas after him, and not just on earth, throughout the limitless universe in which worlds are as many as sands of the Ganges River are spread endlessly. Endless worlds. The baby Buddha, of course, after proclaiming the selfless truth and these miracles occurring, as far as we know, then did what all babies do. He peed, he pooped, he smiled, he laughed, he gurgled, he cooed. He was a baby. And when he was grown, as Prince Siddhartha, after seeing the signs of impermanence, he gave it all up, his throne, his wealth, his position, and he set off into the wilderness of forests and mountains to fulfill a deeper calling. In his complete enlightenment, all potential powers of the mind for wisdom and compassion were, tradition holds, opened and fulfilled. And amazingly, of course, this is another miracle of the story of the Buddha's birth and life, is that he did this on his own. Though he had several teachers at the start, supposedly 2 of the most noted teachers of his time, he came to feel they did not go far enough, and so he rather quickly moved on. This ongoing effort arose out of a determination to benefit all beings. It arose out of a conviction that there was something more beyond the senses and intellect, yet not separate from them. It arose out of a dedication to the reality, not just the possibility of awakening, the reality of it. It arose out of his own dismay and disillusionment and grievous pain caused by errors and failures. And it arose out of lifetimes of previous effort as dramatized in the Jataka tales. This is our own story in so many ways. That's the point of myth, isn't it? That's what Joseph Campbell pointed out again and again in The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It's our own story. And he felt that the Buddha's mythic life story was the closest we had as a planetary universal myth, the essence of it. Birth, old age, or birth, disillusionment with the culture we're born into, seeing something that we can't explain beyond it, some need we have to find our own way to something, realizing something which gets expressed as a life that benefits our communities, and then growing old and passing away. This is the myth, to accomplish something in this life, the hero's journey, the heroine's journey, to bring a gift back to our time and place, and then to pass on, as we all must. So, knowing from our own practice how hard it is to catch even a glimpse of realization, Prince Siddhartha's ability to accomplish the entire path alone is not simply extraordinary, but is a miracle tale. It is miraculous. So his birth is, on this other level of myth, cause for celebration. A tremendous amount of hard work was still needed before what was already in place for him at birth had become fully mature. Yet the essence was there, fully established with those words, above the heavens, below the heavens. Now, this above the heavens, below the heavens is not something that's unique to the East or to Buddhism. The 17th century English Christian theologian and mystic Thomas Traherne, whose works, by the way, disappeared for hundreds of years and were found in a bookseller's stall, I think in the late 18th century. Nobody had ever read them. The Centuries of Meditation, which were Traherne's writings and poetry, were completely unknown until about maybe the end of the 18th century. In any case, here's what he wrote about his own childhood in the 3rd century of Centuries of Meditation. It's quite an extraordinary piece. I'm stunned by it when I read it every time. So here it goes. The corn was orient and immortal wheat, which never should be reaped, nor was ever sown. I thought, he's speaking about his childhood, I thought it had stood from everlasting to everlasting. The dust and stones of the street were as precious as gold. The gates were at first the end of the world. The green trees, when I saw them first through one of the gates, transported and ravished me. Their sweetness and unusual beauty made my heart to leap. And almost mad with ecstasy, they were such strange and wonderful things. The men, oh, what venerable and reverend creatures did the aged seem, immortal cherubim, and young men glittering and sparkling angels, and maids, strange seraphic pieces of life and beauty. Boys and girls tumbling in the street and playing were moving jewels. I knew not that they were born or should die, but all things abided eternally as they were, in their proper places. Eternity was manifest in the light of the day, and something infinite behind everything appeared, which talked with my expectation and moved my desire. The city seemed to stand in Eden or to be built in heaven. The streets were mine. The temple was mine. The people were mine. Their clothes and gold and silver were mine, as much as their sparkling eyes, fair skins, and ruddy faces. The skies were mine, and so were the sun and moon and stars, and all the world was mine, and I the only spectator and enjoyer of it. I knew no churlish properties, nor bounds, nor divisions, but all properties and divisions were mine, all treasures, and the possessors of them. So that, with much ado, I was corrupted and made to learn the dirty devices of this world, which now I unlearn and become, as it were, a little child again. I cannot think of a more explicit statement of what it means to be born as a Buddha, or of the Buddha's birth, or what I alone, the honored one, means. Absolute selflessness. It is our birthright, and yet it will take our entire life, indeed many lives, once we make the commitment to realize it, to live it, not just to wake to it, but to live it. And this is our challenge. The Buddha's birth led to a practice by which we can confirm the reality of these stunning words. So each year on or around April 8th, we take a little time out of our busy schedules to honor the birth of Shakyamuni Buddha. We're grateful for the possibilities that his efforts opened to us. What he opened to us was a practice to accomplish this at our own rate, in our own way, doing our best, to become full human beings, living from our birthright. Our culture does so much to divert us from this, and we have to live in our culture with balance. It is a real challenge. In any case, we're grateful for the possibilities that his practice, his realization opened to us. Well, you can read the chapter yourself. Of course, Jnan, that notorious fiend of Zen practice, when he related the story of the birth of the Buddha, said this. He said, if I had been there when the Buddha raised one hand to the heavens, the baby Buddha, and lowered the other to earth, and took his 7 steps and proclaimed, above the heavens, below the heavens, I alone, the honored one, I would have knocked him to death at a single stroke and given his flesh to the dogs for food. This would have been some contribution to the peace and harmony of the world. This is high praise from Jnan. Look how much trouble the Buddha's birth has caused all of us. Think of the complexity of your life. How much simpler it would have been if he never opened his mouth. You wouldn't have known about any of this. You wouldn't have to know about Zen and practice and sitting and all of it. You wouldn't have to worry about trying to carve out space in your schedule to come do this. You wouldn't have to worry about doing it by Zoom or in person. You could be free to do whatever you want. Ha! Good luck. Instead, we have these poisonous words, which is why Jnan said, if I'd been there, I would have knocked him to death with one blow, cut him to pieces and fed his body to the dogs to bring some peace into the world. So, Roshi Kapleau, by the way, loved this quote, which reminds us that we don't need fantastic legends or images, as wonderful as they are, because they too can bind us and trip us up. When we throw them away, we find that the Buddha was simply a person who, deeply troubled by impermanence and deeply aspiring to be of benefit to all, put his own life on the line to realize truth and open a path for others to follow to it. Jnan, 1,500 years after the Buddha and 1,000 years before us, wanted us to be like the Buddha and awake, not remain trapped by signs and wonders, but to practice this path ourselves and realize awakening ourselves. So while myth suggests vast realities, the word myth itself has, of course, as we know, been popularly degraded to mean like half-truth, half-baked understanding of reality. It's like false, it's a myth. Perhaps this is due to a half-baked understanding that myth is not literal. And of course it's not. That doesn't mean it's false. That would be a failure to understand that regarded properly, myth leads us to the very door that Zen practice flings wide open, even as it speaks back from the other side of that gateless gate. So we will stop here. There's a couple more pages, but as I said, you can read it on your own. So the end we might say is this. To unpack the mythic language a bit further, we might say that whenever self-centered delusive thinking falls away and a person awakes to the selfless reality of above the heavens, below the heavens, a Buddha is born. The sweet little figure of the baby Buddha that we have on the altar and is set up, that we'll pour sweet tea over to wash it free of all falsehoods, all impurities, all delusion, is a way of purifying our own mind of delusion, of falsehood. And this little baby Buddha rouses a sense of tender devotion to ourselves, to our own practice, to others. It's also a highly concentrated image of actual practice realization. With awakening, a Buddha is born. Of course, awakening doesn't mean one total overwhelming thing. In his case, it did. But for us, it means minute-to-minute practice, realization, awakening upon awakening upon awakening, minute-by-minute practice. In addition, it does also point back into legend and history that simultaneously teach and touch base with the fact that we each have this potential at this very moment, right now. So, baby Buddhas, awake, rejoice. And we will stop the Teisho here. I will stop the recording, and we'll do our ceremony. But we will not do the 4 vows. Oh, we're going to sit. Oh, okay. So we sit for another half an hour. Woo-woo. An opportunity to awake. Okay. So we sit for another half an hour. Then we have our ceremony in honor of the Buddha's birth, and those who are in person will get to pour sweet tea over the baby Buddha. We'll keep each of you in mind as we do that. So you will be here with us for this, and then we will recite our great vows for all, our intention to awake from baby Buddhas to grown-up ones. Okay, so we'll stop here for now.